Okay, welcome,
Thank
Malik.
you.
I wanted to begin our conversation with a very specific example. I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago when Germany decided to return the Benin bronzes back to Africa. And of course, this is all related to this very long debate around restitution of certain objects back to the African, of art objects back to the African continent. And I'm wondering what you make of such a decision on a very pragmatic level when all of a sudden these objects, which have been held in these collections and institutions for a very long time under certain categories and taxonomies, are being returned to the continent. How can they even be received? Do you know what I mean? Like, how is it even possible after all these years being stolen and stored in collections to travel back and be received by those communities? What do you think about that, or how do you how do you think about these gestures in the end?
I think that this is a very good decision because for me, in my point of view, it is a decision of justice because those objects left the continent in a very troubled condition and in the historical context in which the relation of power have not been in the very big equilibrium. So deciding to return back this object is to avoid that now this object belong to the societies first, and second that the object should be in these societies. It is not alone, it is a definitive return. It should be a definitive return because restitution is when you avoid that these objects you have in your storage, in your museum, are not belong to you, and this is an illicit belonging, and you should return it definitively. So for me it's very good, and from the point of view of African institution also, it is a very big example that encourage many new politics in museum. How museum now should have a new standing and should also have a new political science, scientific politics also, and cultural one also inside each institution, but also between all these museums that are in Africa. So it is a very encouraging decision, and that's why for me I have a very big, very positive reception of this. But this is one thing. The second thing is that this kind of restitution should not be some separate sample, just a thing that have not will not be continued in a long process, because restitution is not one step, it should be many steps. It is a very long process because those objects are not 10 or 20 or 100. We are talking about many objects that are in the storage of this museum, and those objects are not only object, tangible thing that you can touch, manipulate it, and contemplate it because of their maybe aesthetic value. Those objects are very symbolic memories, histories, knowledge, and represent for these societies something that we cannot measure, because it's more than things that you can see. We are talking about things that you can live in your body. We're talking about things that you can smell. We're talking about things that are like ghosts that have no place and that leave some empty place. And those empty places will be, rehabilitated by the legitimated spirit. So every society don't live only with economy, with politics, with cultural exchange. Society lives, and specifically in our community, with something that are very symbolic and intangible. So we should have this reception of this, restitution. We should have this lecture from this angle. And if we do, we will know that those objects are more than so much money or so much richness. Those objects are more than all this. So it's very, very, very important for institutions, for societies, and also for scholars.
Yeah, how exactly comes your practice as an art historian who's very much invested in a decolonial approach? How do you then engage with this process and, let's say, with receiving these what the West might call objects, but which are way more than that in the end? How do you receive them in sort of like your practice as an art historian?
Maybe before being art historian, I'm a member of the society, and my practice and my feeling as a member of the society maybe lead me to be an art historian. So I will have two levels of feeling about this. The first one is that in my practice as a member of the society, when I was young, I don't have, if I compare myself with other people, I did not have the opportunity to see major piece of works that my ancestors have done in my museum. So I suppose that if in the past I have this opportunity, I will learn so much about my history than today. But as an art historian, I have also the opportunity to make many research on this subject. So my involvement in this process will be also in two levels. Maybe in the scientific level, and maybe in another level that is very connected with the scientific level for me. It is the militantisms. Maybe I can say curatorial activisms. So for the scientific level, it's for me very important to have the opportunity now to be involved in this discussion in order to involve new generation of students and scholars that will have the opportunity to catch these ideas, to access to this object and to do some works on it. But in the other way, in the what I called curatorial activisms, it is also for me an opportunity to make money research on this archive of this object, because this object have to create archives because colonizer make money discourse on this object, sometimes very false. But these objects in themselves are archives. So my job here, like a historian but like curator, is to deal with this object in order to reveal new memory, in order to reveal new mythology, and to make this object have a new relationship with history, but also make me to have a new relationship with history. So for me, it's in this maybe field of curatorial activisms that my practice as art historian will be strengths, because these two spheres are for me complementary.
And how, because you were just mentioning there are, actually millions of objects, right? We're not talking about a small number, but like really lots of objects that are being, that are not on the continent at this point, from various different geographies. How do you work with your other African colleagues? How do you exchange, experience, knowledge? Are there networks? Because that's very important, right? To be also in exchange about those new methodologies and new writings of history, but also epistemologies.
I should admit that the question of restitution is new question of restitution because it is not a new one. It is the second big discussion. It is very positive in this sense that it permits African institutions and African colleagues to make new connection in order to discuss around this same topic. So it is an opportunity for us now to be in connection during very many meetings, but also in connection during some project of research. Now we are in a project that is called Museum Future, where the Goethe Institute is involved, for example, in support. And this project is very important because it permits us to have or to try to build together between our six museums in Africa a new vision of the future. So it is very positive. But inside every country, when I take the example of Senegal, this discussion of restitution also is an opportunity because many colleagues, I think, that try to have a new vision of their institutions in the context of these debates, because you have this argument that African museums are not great, they have not the condition to make their storage very performant and to have a good museum. All the things that are false, because museum has a very long evolutions, and those arguments was the very old one and never changed. And in the meantime, many museums are built, and the old museums also are very you have a renaissance, renew themselves.
Renaissance, yeah.
Yes. So these colleagues are in a new idea of construction of new model of museum, and this debate stimulate so much how the college should work. And these critics also are very positive in the sense because it permits to the college to reveal all the things that they have done that was not seen by colleagues that are in Europe, for example, because we have done a lot of job in order to build some models that are endogenous, and in order also to have a new way to deal with the objects that are in our museum. We make many research on cultural mediation. We make many research in my museum, for example, Theodore Museum, on scenography. Scenography has, a European museum has lived the scenography, should not be the same with us. We cannot have the same way to make object visible. We should not have the same way to deal with the object. And in this process, what we are changing is the idea of museum. So in Africa, we have many sociological change now that are not probably visible for all these persons that make those critics. And this evolution, this change are not, copy, is not a reproduction of what we see in Europe. So it is very interesting. So, but I should admit that this debate of restitution permits the world maybe to focus on this change and on this evolution.
I'm also, because you're also involved with the biennial in Dakar, I'm also wondering what this entire debate actually means for the contemporary art scene on the continent, and how artists that work in the contemporary context are influenced. I mean, of course they're influenced by it, maybe not everyone, but I'm sure that a lot of them are influenced by it. How do you view that? What influence does it have in your perspective or from your experience?
I think that contemporary art on the continent is very dynamic, and it is probably those artists who began to change the textures, the tissue, of contemporary art. So because at one time contemporary art was very exhausted, and the very dynamic artist now, I think that they come from the continent. The first thing. And the second thing is that on the continent we have many cultural centers, many biennale now, many cultural events, and also a reflection on a new knowledge that emerge on what contemporary art is the market, what contemporary art is the society. And also artists on the continent also reinvent many method and material. So I think that the Biennale of Dakar try to reveal and try to legitimate all this new way of thinking art in a in our contemporaneity. So this biennale is very, old, comparing many biennale that are on the continent, and it is one of the very powerful biennale because it is permanent during all this very long history since 1990s. 2020 was the second years that the biennale was, postponed. So it is a very, very big baobab in this context of contemporary art. So I can say that it is a very, testimony of how Africa is very dynamic in the sense of creating new imagination that are illustrated by artworks now.
And what is it, for example, like talking about themes, or you were also talking about materials, like what is inspiring you at this point as
I think
specific
that
examples?
We have many things that artists reappropriate all this material that exists now. During the 90s, critic literature used the term of bricolage, like this, these artists cannot adapt themselves with new technology. For example, they are in the renovation of material that are put in the waste. But now, those artists are in the cinema, in the installation of multimedia, in the installation of sound, and mixed all these technologies. And me, I love so much installation because I think that for a long time, particularly in Senegal, it was very deeply roots in painting, and this material is now very, I think that tired a little. An artist in the beginning of 2000 began to change their relationship with painting, and many artists now try to be in video installation, in sound installation, sometimes, and even the topics also change. For a long time, they focus on immigration, many things like that. Today, artists are, in the space, in the city, and one of the very important things is that those artists have a very social interaction in their art language. Many artists, or they are in the collective, or they are in single, try to have dispositive in their artworks that be in interaction with the societies. It is very important in this context because for a long time, some contemporary artists was trying to do exactly what was considered like, the level of art in Europe. And now it is not the case. Now I think they find the same way. And one of the very important things is that this art they are doing talk for and talk with the societies. And many artists try to put themselves in the market, for example, took themselves in interaction with textile and with many materials that usually are used by craft, for example, or by cinema or by many a very big variety of technique that we use in the tradition or that are used now in everywhere.
And would you also consider that, is there like a decolonial art practice then? Are there healing moments in it, like a finding of one's own identity again? When you earlier just said that it's also stepping away, or many artists are stepping away from merely copying or imitating a certain kind of like Western aesthetic. Is it a movement towards oneself and therefore like a healing?
I think that in many techniques or discipline, there is one time where some group inside the discipline began to know and to understand that they should stop to reproduce the same method that the discipline used in the past. And in literature we have this, and in contemporary art also we have this. But we cannot say that all these artists are in this technique of decolonization. Some artists sometimes have not a very big consciousness of the way where decolonizing theory or art should be. Some are very deeply ranked in the new idea of what decolonizing art should be. I should admit that more and more it is the majority. Many artists are now in this concept of post-colonial or decolonial, with many techniques and be inspired by some moment of the history of Africa, or are inspired sometimes by some example of our contemporary daily life. But we should say that this very big dynamic of contemporary art also is strengthened by this idea of decolonizing method, and decolonizing also philosophy idea, and because those artists are also intellectual, those artists are also member of their society, and we should not forget that the material they use is like a writer will use pen and write some things. And those artists also have sometimes, the big majority, a very well conceptualization of the relationship that should be exist with the ideas they develop and the material they use in order to develop those ideas. And this connection is an example of maturity, I think.
But do you think there's still, like in younger generations, have they completely stopped to look towards Europe? And do you feel that there's this sense of like, we are autonomous, we can do whatever we want? Or is there, we're also now living in this entire Instagram and like social media culture, so there's influences from all over the world, but do you identify like this moment where younger artists are just, way more confident in claiming their own position without having to copy? Is there like a generational shift?
I think that when we see our art history in the continent, what we call modernity was in two parts. One part that was deeply ranked in the consciousness of how to develop something that is, local, and another part that was preoccupied by a dialogue, how to create a symbiosis. During the 60s, for example, we have two big artists in Senegal that illustrate this. Ibn Ndiaye would try to make dialogues, and Papa Ibra Tall would try to develop some, local ideology of what African art should be. During the 90s, it was the creation of the Biennale of Dakar, contemporary African art. But in the beginning, the name of the Biennale was not the Biennale of Contemporary African Art. It was the International Biennale of Art. So in this context, the idea was how to be open and to reproduce, and in order to be in interaction with all this technology, methodology, material, that are in the very big museum, and it was what we call international art. But now, I think that artists try only to focus their way. Even if in this group, some of them are conscious, be deeply rooted in a consciousness of decolonizing idea and methodology, but they are only in their way. What does it mean? It means that they try, in their context, in their sociology, in their history, they try to reinvent some method to reinvent material that they deal with. But they also are in the same times in the global mainstream of art. And I think that this is maybe this thing which is very interesting, because they only try to focus their way in order to do their art. All the question of I'm African or I'm artist is over, they forget it. They only try to do their art.
Their art, but while still being in the global conversation or being a part of the global conversation. It's inevitable at this point.
It's evident, yes.
Yeah.
It's evident.
Yeah.
So the question is not on the table. Yeah. It's not on the table. They don't discuss it. They just do their art in the global mainstream, but relating to what they feel, and in this context they reinvent it, and they make contemporary art in very big evolutions.
And claiming their own freedom in a way to practice and to do.
Absolutely.
What they want to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.